What you're looking at here is a still frame from some footage I shot in downtown Chicago with the Ursa Mini 4.6K. Now, these are some quick test shots I did with the Ursa Mini, and I'm going to compare them to some similar shots I got with the GH4. I apologize, this is not super scientific. The shoot was our main focus. However, I was able to capture these quick shots, so we can look through them as kind of a non-scientific comparison between the Ursa Mini 4.6K and the GH4. So here's a still frame from the footage I shot with the GH4 with Vlog-L recording internally. Now, I know these don't match perfectly, but I was just trying to get a quick idea of what each camera could do compared to the other. And here's another shot from the Ursa Mini. Now, I should mention that all of the footage I'm showing right now is ungraded right out of the cameras. We will get to some colored footage in a little bit, but I wanted to go through the raw stuff as it came off the card. And here you can see a similar shot taken from the GH4. Again, we're recording internally using Vlog-L. That is not the best way to record Vlog-L on a GH4. However, I didn't have an external monitor recorder with me at this time, so I made do with what I could. And you can see that on the GH4 clip, it does have a slight green cast. It's very common recording internally on the GH4. The HDMI output actually has more of a magenta look, like you'll see in some of this Ursa Mini footage. So it depends on how you're recording the footage, but just know for this test, a lot of the GH4 stuff will look slightly green, while a lot of the Ursa Mini stuff will look slightly magenta. And here's the final shot that we're going to be looking at. This is from the Ursa Mini 4.6K daylight instead of the nighttime stuff that we were looking at before. And again, another similar shot from the GH4 trying to match the settings as close as possible. If we look at these shots side by side, we can start to see a few things. The Ursa Mini is a lot cleaner in the shadows compared to the GH4, and we're actually pushing the Ursa Mini here up to its limit of ISO 1600. The GH4 can go much higher. However, it's not really advised to shoot that high ISO on the GH4 because it gets noisy very fast. Both of these cameras are going to be ideal around 800 ISO. You can push the Ursa Mini up to 1600 if you need to, but I'd keep it around 800 or pull it down to 400, just depending on your shot. The GH4, on the other hand, looks a little odd in comparison because with Vlog-L, it's doing that thing where it squeezes all of the data into kind of that 20% to 80% region. So you see on that lamp, it's not actually blowing out at 100%. It's kind of an off-white, slightly gray color. We're going to fix that with coloring in a little bit, but it is a little interesting to compare these two as the Ursa Mini is using that full color range or luminance range to capture that data. And here's that second shot as comparison. Now, the focal lengths aren't exact. I wasn't using the same lens on both cameras. Like I said, this was not super scientific, just a couple shots that I was able to grab similarly on both cameras as best I could. I filmed a lot more with the Ursa Mini that I'll be making videos just kind of talking about that camera, the experience, showing more test footage. But for this specifically, I wanted to get shots that were very close and approximates of one another, so you can see that here. Focal length doesn't match exactly, but hopefully I did a good enough job getting exposure close and framing and composition close enough. And here we have that third shot. I do like the Ursa Mini's color. I'm using the film profile on there, which is kind of a log type equivalent, but basically a flat kind of gradable image. I like how it's still usable right off the camera compared to Vlog-L on the GH4, which is very flat, very washed out, and would absolutely need some kind of coloring. Speaking of color, here is that first Ursa Mini shot, graded with a slight curve. I'm trying to match the LUT that I applied to the GH4, which you'll see in a second, but I basically did a simple curves adjustment. There's so many different ways to do color that I couldn't say that my way is the right way or that you should do it a certain way or the way you do it is wrong. So I want to keep it as basic and as straightforward as possible, giving you an idea of what a graded image might look like, but really this is very basic, very bare bones, and you probably would want to do your own tweaks to this image, and you might not even want to make it as contrasty. I really like the Ursa Mini footage right off the camera with that kind of that film look where it's a little bit more muted, sort of like a log look, but some people like a little bit more contrast. So that's what you're seeing here, kind of a curves adjustment to match this next shot. So here's that GH4 shot that I referred to earlier where those highlights weren't blown out. Now what I've done is I've applied the basic Panasonic LUT to the Vlog-L footage. Now this is a LUT supplied by Panasonic, meant to take Vlog-L footage into kind of a Rec. 709 space. There are a ton of different LUTs out there. There's so many different ways to do this. I wanted to do something that was very simple, very basic, and you can kind of use your judgment or interpretation from there. So we're getting that full luminance range back. So 0 to 100, we've got blacks, we've got whites, and you can see there's a lot more contrast in this image, and it's a lot richer looking. And you can see that there is some noise and there's still some problem areas. However, it's pretty clean, all things considered. Now, there was a decent amount of light, even though it is a low light environment where we're outside, but it is the streets of Chicago. So we've got lights, we've got signs, we've got cars, everything kind of brightening up the atmosphere. And there was a decent amount of cloud cover too, kind of bouncing all that light back down. So even though this is nighttime, there still was a decent amount of light to make a good image. This next image I definitely underexposed. I could have made it quite a bit brighter. However, I wanted to grade it so that these clips would match as best as possible using these simple color correction tools. And here you see that first Ursa Mini shot where we've kind of pulled those shadows down a little bit, added a little bit more contrast to give it kind of a punchier feel. Here we've got that same GH4 shot with the Vlog L LUT applied. You can see there's a lot more contrast. Those shadows have really been pushed down. And the thing with Vlog L and log footage in general is it's very easy to underexpose, as I've done here. Monitoring in a log format just is a lot more challenging to get your exposure right because it's harder to tell what's bright and what's dark because everything kind of looks more mid-gray. So it's very easy to underexpose your shots if you're doing a run and gun situation like this. And that's why I underexposed it. You need to be monitoring with proper LUTs or monitoring your histogram or using a gray card, some kind of a method for setting exposure to make sure that you're not underexposed, because often what will happen when you're shooting Vlog L is that you're probably doing it in an environment where there's a lot of dynamic range, so you're trying to save your highlights, and it's very easy to get parts of your image that you don't want underexposed. Someone's face, it might look fine when you're monitoring log, and then you go and grade it, and all of a sudden all of that gets pushed way down. And you may say, okay, well, it's good that I have it, that I can keep it, but the thing with Vlog L is that anything kind of below that 50% mark on that luminance scale starts to get a lot of noise really quick. So here you can see a lot of that has been pushed down towards, the 0% range where it's pure black, but there is a lot of noise in that spectrum of luminance. So just be really careful when you're shooting log on the GH4 on any camera, because if you underexpose it, there's going to be a lot of extra noise in there that will be challenging to work with in post-production. And finally, here's that last image with the Ursa Mini with a slight curves adjustment to it. You can see there's a lot of information in the background and the highlights of those skyscrapers compared to the GH4 shot, which you'll see here. You can see a lot of that information is kind of blowing out closer to white. And that's what's really nice about the Ursa Mini, is that it does give you that extra dynamic range to work with. And it's a lot easier to keep your highlights than it is with a cheaper camera like the GH4 that doesn't have quite as much dynamic range. Here we'll go through them again side by side. These are the exact same color settings. So on the left, you see the Ursa Mini with that slight curves adjustment. And on the right, we have the GH4 with that basic LUT applied. With the second shot, you can really see that distinction with those greens in the skin tones on the GH4 compared to the Ursa Mini that has a lot more pleasing color right out of the camera. And for this shot in daylight where we have sufficient lighting for Vlog L, I actually really like the way the basic LUT renders the color from the GH4. It actually looks quite nice to my eye. The Ursa Mini looks good too, and with a little bit more color correction, both of these shots would be really nice. But that's why it's so important when you're shooting log to make sure your exposure is spot on, maybe even a little bit overexposed, to make sure you're getting as clean a footage as possible. Now with the Ursa Mini, it's a lot easier to keep those highlights because of that extra dynamic range. So it's this constant balance of saving your highlights versus having your shadows too clean or too noisy, because it's really easy to save your highlights on the GH4, but then all of a sudden your shadows get really, really noisy. So you need to have sufficient lighting to make sure that your whole image is exposed properly, not just worrying about the highlights, but worrying about the whole image from bottom to top. If you want to check out a few more test shots I did with the Ursa Mini and the GH4, you can head over to my Facebook page, check those out. I posted them a while back, but they should be fairly easy to find. These are some shots I took right when I got the Ursa Mini. This was a rental for this project specifically, so I only had it for a couple days. I tried to film with it as much as possible. Like I said, there'll be some more videos coming where I show some test footage and some more of my thoughts and opinions on the camera. Overall, though, I can say that it is a worthy upgrade from the GH4, but these cameras are quite different. You know, one camera is $1,000, the other one's $5,000 for the body only, not to mention all the accessories you're going to need. So when you're comparing them, it is kind of apples to oranges, but I do think that anyone looking to upgrade from something like a GH4 or an A6300 or maybe even an A7S, their next step up is probably looking at the Ursa Mini 4.6K, and it is worth it in my opinion. Now, that's only if you have the money to actually spend. You know, don't pay for this camera if you're not going to be making money with it, because there's so much you can do with the cheaper cameras. You know, the GH4 is a great camera, and even though it doesn't shine quite as bright as the Ursa Mini 4.6K in this test, you know, the Ursa Mini has a little bit of extra features and a little bit more benefits over the GH4. That doesn't mean the GH4 is garbage either. They're different cameras for different people at different price points. And if you need the extra image quality, which I needed for the shoot, I actually was worried about dynamic range. So that's why I'm really glad I used the Ursa Mini instead of relying on just the GH4, because it helped out quite a bit having that extra dynamic range. But unless you know you need that or you're willing to pay for it, know that you can be content and you can be happy with something like a GH4, an A7S, and A6300. Most cameras nowadays are good enough to shoot good looking footage. Even the shots in this, I was pretty surprised how close the GH4 and the Ursa Mini were. Now, Ursa Mini is definitely better. It's got cleaner shadows, more dynamic range. However, there's also that big price point difference. So just keep that in mind anytime you're looking at camera tests of any kind. Always factor in that price point, because there's people out there who can spend $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, and there's people who can only spend $500. And there needs to be cameras for all of us, and I think that's why it's such a cool time to live and be in video production, because there really is something for every kind of shooter.